Good morning, Brunswick, Maine. My name is Roger Wilder,
My name is John Erlinson.
and this is our debut of our new show, Bear Tracks, here on WBOR 91.1 FM. Every Thursday morning from 9 to 10 a.m., two of us will be here on air talking about different ecological facts and topics, ranging from bison to coral reefs. For our first show, we decided to start with something that we were both familiar with and passionate about to get a bit more comfortable, sharing our passions with you all. And we decided to go with birding, and hopefully get you a bit more interested in those topics, and get you outside, enjoy the great world of birds here in Maine or wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's Minnesota or New Mexico. And so I guess we'll start off with brief introductions about ourselves. John, you want to take it away?
Yeah, before we get more into birding, so I'm a senior currently at Bowdoin. We're both seniors, and we're both primarily majoring in biology and a concentration at Bowdoin here known as ecology, evolution, and marine biology. I know Roger is really a big marine biology guy. He'll probably just tell you he studies marine biology if you ask him on the street. And I also have an interest in creative writing in English and as well as Mandarin Chinese. And I do some a cappella on campus as well as some improv. And I recently started a column in the Bowdoinorian. So if you look that up online in the opinions section, I've got a column that is titled a Tree Huggers, something with an H. Like a Tree Huggers newspaper. It's a synonym for newspaper. I'm blanking on that right now. My first time on the radio, so I apologize for that. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Roger to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from Minnesota originally, Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I love Minnesota. If you're from Minnesota, go Skol Vikings.
Yeah, I'm Roger. Like John said, I'm also a biology major here on campus, College of Evolution and Marine Biology concentration, and I am more of a marine biology guy. Huge interest in coral reefs, especially, but a wide interest in animals in general. And I also love getting to combine the ocean here, only a 30-minute drive from campus, with all the great forested areas, sand plains, salt marshes. I'm originally from New Mexico, so I between the two of us, we've got a pretty good coverage of the United States, and can give a pretty broad, we have a broad appreciation and interest for different areas around the country, for sure.
For sure.
On campus, I'm also an a cappella. I play jazz. I'm part of club tennis and frisbee as well. That's my biggest interest. And in terms of biology, I've done a lot of work with a lot of different systems, both in school and over summer breaks, studying some fish, mummy chug behavior, coral reefs. Right now I'm working on my honors in plant physiology and photosynthesis, so hopefully we get a chance to talk about that a little bit more later. But as I mentioned, we're going to start the show off today with birds, on the history of birding, what birding means to us, and hopefully excite you guys to get out a bit more.
Yeah, highlight some of the birds you can see right now in Maine and all that. We really felt like starting with birding was a great idea because, I mean, it's just a great gateway into knowing more about the natural world around you, wherever you are. And there are birds everywhere, all 7 continents, even, penguins in Antarctica, where there's pretty much nothing else. To my knowledge, mammals haven't made it to Antarctica, and really nor amphibians or things like that. I almost said reptiles, but disclaimer, folks, if you weren't aware, birds are reptiles. So reptiles is sort of a misleading word that kind of angers a lot of biologists, but maybe we'll get into that a little bit more later and how they're related to reptiles and what they share with them. But yeah, we'll do a lot more pitching for birding and different ways you can go birding throughout this episode. But, just I woke up this morning and I looked outside my window getting ready for this first time on the radio for a new show, and of course there was a raven sitting right there on the tree. Besides plants and insects, really, birds are really something you'll see more than anything else. And they're incredibly charming, and the more you explore them, the more you realize there are out there, and the more exciting it really all is. So, yeah, hopefully we can inform you a little bit today and share a little bit of our excitement with you guys.
Yeah, I think to talk a bit more about birding historically, before we kind of jump into what it looks like now in the modern day and how has expanded to a much wider audience. It really started off. Well, bird watching has been around for a really long time.
Forever, probably.
Probably forever. People across continents, ancient Europe, all the way back to Africa and Asia. There's records of birds all through those countries. You see in ancient China, people fascinated by wild bird species. Comes up in all of their records. And this appreciation kind of evolved into a lot of different pathways, different forms. You see a lot of people taking birds for their feathers, hunting them for their clothes and to make their clothes. And you see this kind of degeneration of a lot of different species groups. Of course, people weren't super aware of conservation at the time. And so it became very difficult to kind of tease apart humans' relationships with birds between the good and the bad. And as birding kind of continued on, people began to realize that the impact they're having on their environment, especially sailors going to these places where birds are extremely unique. Darwin's referencing birds that live on islands that have never been seen outside of these islands before. And by the time that many of them were referenced, they were already gone. By the 1800s, again, the time of Darwin, Wallace, Audubon, bird collecting and feather collecting has kind of proliferated. But people are starting to become more aware of the impact they're having on their environment. Even through Audubon and Darwin, who collected many live samples of birds, they start to kind of spread this knowledge and awareness of the fact that birds should be protected, partially for their evolutionary importance. And the importance of learning about them in terms of science. And then as you move into the 1900s, you start seeing stuff like the Migratory Bird Act popping up, which limits people from taking feathers, from keeping wild birds, in an effort to conserve them. Throughout this time, birding becoming more and more popular amongst a variety of different groups. And now, in the 2000s, you see people of all age groups of all over the world birding with great interest, with a much more conservationist approach, much more preservation focused, hoping to learn about these species in a pretty non-invasive way, just by viewing them out in the wild, without involving yourself too much, people in their personal lives. And of course, there's still much to be done in terms of bird conservation. So the more people that are out there learning about birds, looking at birds, and contributing to databases, which is very simple to do on apps. We'll talk about that more in a bit. It really has a great impact on wildlife as a whole.
Yeah, and of course, conserving one species, and this will be a big theme of the show overall, of how interrelated everything is, even humans with the ecosystem and the rest of the organisms around them. So conserving one bird, like the crows or black-capped chickadees or cardinals you see outside, means conserving the plants, which means conserving the insects, which means conserving everything, which means we have better air to breathe and cooler places to go take a walk with our dog outside. Sort of more off of what Roger was saying, obviously recently birding has become a lot more accessible, especially with the inclusion of things such as of apps such as, and these are all sponsored by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the Merlin Bird ID app and the eBird app that goes along with that, and also just the eBird website online, which really recommend you guys check all those things out. For me, I think we could probably get into sort of our our own birding stories and our own journeys and how we sort of came to love birds. For me, this is Roger's been doing it forever, which we'll get into, but for me, this started quite recently. I think the summer after my first year of college, so going into my sophomore year, I had only taken intro bio at that point, and I was, kind of just discovering my love for the natural world. And my mom and I went on a walk just in a park guided by a local ranger who was quite interested in birds. He had us download Merlin and eBird on our phones, and we walked around with him and probably saw 20 species or so. And then I went back and I was kind of just scrolling through the app and reading more, and I clicked on American Robin. You download this app and it's amazing, all these birds you've never knew were around you. And I think in Brunswick right now on Merlin there's 126 species of birds that you can see around here, which is just, unbelievable. I think it would have been unbelievable to me just a couple of years ago. Just the vast diversity of avian wildlife around. And so I was reading about the American robin, and I saw, so a juvenile American robin has a white spotted breast as opposed to that like classic like purely red breast that you're used to seeing. And sure enough, like I think it was later in that day, I was out sitting on the front porch of my house, looking out at the lake, and here was this little robin hopping around. I mean, little, it was the same size as any robin you see, hopping through the grass as they do, and it had this sort of speckled, uneven chest, some red, but a whole lot of white in there. And I was like, oh my gosh, whoever else was sitting on the porch, I said, that's a juvenile robin. I was just reading about how juvenile robins have the white spots on their chest. And for me, for whatever reason, that was sort of my, I guess what some people call like a spark bird. That was like the first, I was like, that is really cool. I knew that. For whatever reason, that just clicked in my head. And then, I went out to the back of my house, and it's sort of like a marshy swamp area. And, you just turn on Merlin ID, and suddenly it's taking like 6, 8, 12 different birds that's the magic. One of the magic parts of that app is you can just click record, and it listens to the birds around you and tells you what they are. So you can, do that anywhere. You can do that sitting inside your house with the window open. And yeah, that's where I fell in love with green herons, which I maybe will talk a little bit more about later, and all that sorts of stuff. And from then, it's really been, I take birding with me everywhere. It brings me closer to my roommate, Oscar, brought me a lot closer to him, and my friend here, Roger, who I'm doing this show with now. It brings you closer to professors. When I studied abroad in Denmark, I had several of my teachers out there were interested in birds, and that's just immediately birders are sort of unified by their love for birds. And, you can bird anywhere, so it's always exciting. Wherever you go, through my travels in Europe, through a trip I took to the Bahamas, you're always looking out for birds, and they're always new, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think the community aspect of birding is certainly one of the best parts, if not the best parts. And I think the people that you meet through an interest with birds, they really extend across a variety of age groups, variety of nationalities. It really connects you with a pretty broad community of people all across the globe, as John was saying. I think for me, in terms of my spark bird, it's a bit harder to pinpoint, I think. All my life, I've loved animals, and I've had a great appreciation for birds for a very long time. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a very deep interest in marine biology, but being from New Mexico in the desert, there's not too many opportunities to get really involved, to study that down there. I was originally from Illinois, Chicagoland, so I grew up going to the Shedd Aquarium, going to the Field Museum, going to the Art Institute, lots of different environmentally focused, great international institutions as well. When I moved to New Mexico, I was a little bit worried about continuing my study of the ocean, especially. But later on, as I kind of moved there, I was trying to learn more about the environment, learn more about the animals that live there, and I started my third grade class. Back in, what is this now? I'm so old. 2012, 2012.
Something like that.
And I walked into class the first day, and of course I had no friends. Just brand new, super worried. Everyone grew. I moved to a small town in Mexico with a population of roughly 200 to 300 people. So everyone in that community was, at least had grown up together. At least the kids that were my age. Many people knew each other very well. So I certainly felt very out of place. But I walked into that third grade class, and I was immediately dive bombed walking into that class by a bunch of cliff swallows, which are these small brown birds, kind of like swifts. Many of you in Maine may know them, or similar birds from nesting in your garages. They build these amazing mud nest structures where they take little bits of mud and dirt, and they mix them with feathers and hair and fur, and they stick them onto the sides of buildings and caves and cliffs. And in many cases, these birds have become very common around humans, around urban areas. Mm-hmm. And so in this little gazebo area at the front of my school, there had been a colony for years and years, as far as anyone can remember, of these cliff swallows, hundreds of them, 300, 400, 500 birds, all building these cave-shaped dome mud nests. And I recommend you look up a picture. It's the downside of radio is I can't share that with you, I suppose. But I recommend that you look that up, and they had built this colony all around this gazebo, and were flying around, grabbing bugs out of the air and going off to bring water back for their young. And as most people were not huge fans, especially because they used the front porch of our elementary school as a bathroom for most of the time. But I was totally fascinated. And later that week, I asked my older teacher, what do you know about these birds and how long have they been here? And instead of just sitting me down or silencing me, she had the whole class stand up, brought us all outside to watch these birds. And we stood there for easily half an hour as she pointed out the different ones, each of the nest, had us kind of focus in very closely on this part of the environment that clearly she had a great appreciation for and wanted to share with us. And ever since then, I have been totally hooked. I think I have primarily her to thank. And birds, especially growing up in the desert, kind of filled this ecological interest, this desire to learn about the environment in a way that the oceans, although were still a deep part of my interest, couldn't really excite me in the same way, at least not in a first-hand tangible way, most of my time growing up. Since then, I joined birding club in 6th and 7th grade, which many other kids refer to as nerding club, but they all came around eventually too.
You had a birding club in middle school?
Yeah, it was run by the 7th grade teacher we had, and I feel like Minnesota would have been a great place for that too. I feel like
probably.
But again, like New Mexico's, it's right on the migration path. Birds are traveling down from Canada down to Mexico and back, depending on the season. So most of the stuff that comes down from the north funnels down through New Mexico into Mexico. So great opportunities to learn about a lot of different species there. And I kind of continued on. And I think John can elaborate more on this too. But birding has really connected me with lots of different people since, whether I'm studying abroad in Japan, back home in Mexico, here in Maine. I've met a great community. And I'm sure we'll have some time at the end to talk more about just stories and like that. But there's a lot more.
Yeah, and in addition to like being able to meet new people, sort of like I was talking about before, like birding has been, I've said this already, I'll say it probably 100 more times, a great way to get in touch with the environments and the habitats and the ecosystem around you and all the organisms around you, because, you go out to see birds and you discover a new plant species, or, you run into different rodents or amphibians or whatever it might be, snakes. But it's really been a primary way, or maybe just a primary excuse to get off campus. So for those who are tuning in from Bowdoin, and you feel, or just the people, who you go to work in the morning and they're there for the day, and then you kind of just come back at home, and if you want to insert a couple new places, an excuse to get outside, there's no better excuse than taking a walk in a park or driving a half an hour to go on a hike or go find a specific bird you've seen has been logged on eBird, and be able to familiarize yourself with the local environment, and just get as an excuse to get out of your routine and wake up early. You can bird any time of the day, of course. Early and sometimes late, like around sunset, are the best times, because that's when the birds maybe are the most active. But it's just a great excuse to get outside, to stretch your legs, and I think if I wasn't birding, I would really have no idea about what Maine looks like for the most part. I love hiking and stuff outside of that, outside of birding, but I just wouldn't have happened. And there's no better bonding experience really than going out with a couple friends and seeing a bird together, perhaps a new bird. My friend Oscar, who we'll maybe have on the show in a future week, is also a very avid birder, and he's a friend of both Roger and I's. He's from Pittsburgh, so he really knows these birds in this region quite well, and he's seen almost all of them. But one of the birds, it's called an American bittern. It's related to things like egrets and great blue herons. So you can imagine like that long neck, long legs, and sort of slender bird. Actually, before I get into this bittern story, before I forget, if you're out there listening and you want to try to guess, I know I've posed this to my family already, so they maybe know, but if you're familiar with the great blue heron, quite a large bird, probably as tall as, most middle schoolers, or more, maybe as tall as my girlfriend. If you want to guess how much a great blue heron weighs, I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if you know this, Roger.
Oh, I don't know.
So I'll give everybody a second to think. I
have a feeling it's got to be light, right? It's got to be...
Probably. If you were guessing 20 pounds, you would be wrong. If you were guessing 10 pounds, you would also be wrong. If you were guessing 30 pounds, you'd be much further away. It's about 5 pounds for these birds that are... I don't know how tall a great blue heron is exactly, maybe 4 feet tall. You see them all over the place, so keep an eye out for the they're kind of gray, but gray blue. Yeah, you got to be that light to be able to fly. Birds have hollow bones. Anyway, that was just a brief aside of something I kind of wanted to talk about today because I thought about it this morning. But getting back into this story, birding with my friend Oscar. We're out birding. He's like, should we just check out this little side patch? We're like, sure. So we walk, maybe like 100 feet, not even, and we're getting closer to like this other small like pond of water, and suddenly Oscar goes, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my freaking gosh, he just starts freaking out, like screaming. He's like, it's an American bittern, it's an American bittern, like, I can't believe it, it's an American bittern. Like, I've never seen him more passionate or more excited about anything.
And I missed this. I've never seen this bird in my life. I've been birding for 10 years and I've never seen this.
Yeah, this is a very elusive bird. It was, it was one of these birds some of Oscar's other birding friends had been holding over his head oh yeah, but you haven't seen an American bittern. They're mostly brown, and they've like got their breast is like brown and like white stripes, and they typically like stand up straight with their neck up, like amongst the reeds, pretty much perfectly camouflaged, like not moving like these heron type birds do. So the fact that we got to see this so close and not in the grass, is just sort of standing on the edge of the water, not really hidden, was pretty amazing. Probably might be the best view I ever get of an American bittern in the rest of my life. And
I may never get a view. I may never see one.
Some of these birds are just so hard to find, even though they're really everywhere, and they're not necessarily. I don't think American bitterns are like necessarily endangered or anything. They just, they're evolved to be elusive, and that's just how they are. I also remember one time Roger, Oscar, and I went out, and I think it was your first time seeing. We were talking about this the other day. I think it was like a Tennessee warbler, maybe, or Nashville warbler, or something like that. Also, a first time. Usually, if it's first timer for one of these guys, since I'm still so early in my birding career, it's most definitely a first timer for me. So it's just awesome, just getting to discover a new bird and really appreciate it for the first time. It's like, people say it's like building a Pokédex in Pokemon or something like that. It is really like real life Pokemon Go. But it is real. Not that I've played plenty of Pokemon Go in my day. No hate on that, but there's something a little bit more special when you have to actually really work to go out and find it. And then as you become more accustomed to these birds around you, it's not just, you happen to come across a bunch of weedles, but you actually recognize the song of the chickadee. And with just a brief second of a bird flying 500 feet above you, you're like, you know what? That flight pattern looks an awful lot like waxwings or something like that. Or just a flash of red in the size, and you're like, that's probably a cardinal. Or you're just like, it's jumping on the ground, it's probably a robin. You just become more and more familiar with it, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the more you get out, the more you learn about the environment and in those ways. It connects you with people, it connects you with wildlife, and seeing a new bird for the first time. John kind of mentioned this too. It's a big deal once you've been in this hobby for a long time. I've seen about 700 different species. That's birders keep a life list. Seeing a species for the first time, you write it down, you save it, you remember it forever. And every one of those birds, and I think this is pretty common across birders. I remember seeing, if not for the first time, at least one time. I remember the people I was with. I remember the place where I was, whether it was climbing a Mayan ruin with my dad in Belize, or whether I was looking out my window during Zoom classes during COVID, which was a great time to get into birding. I think a lot of other people did, but that aside, it helps me remember things too. It shapes my memory of place and of people in a pretty deep and tangible way. And now when I was driving back here with a few buddies after just the end of winter break, back to school, and they were asking about the different birds I've seen. When did you see this bird? Phainopepla, it's called. They were just kind of scrolling through my app, and I said, oh, that was southern New Mexico, and I was 17 years old. I was down there with a few buddies and flew right into a tree, and I have these memories and a great appreciation for wildlife, and from that comes all these great stories like the cliff swallows I talked about earlier, John's American bittern story. And I've had hummingbirds fly up and stick their proboscis in the holes of my watch thinking it was a bright orange flower. This is a connection with nature you really can't get sitting inside. It's whether I'm sitting alone in a mountain, I have an experience like that, or I have an hour-long conversation with someone I've never met before on an Audubon bird hike. It's pretty deep and pretty meaningful. and it builds community. I mean, in Japan too, this semester studying abroad, I was walking down a boardwalk at Ueno Park, and I was carrying the binoculars, telltale sign of a birder, and this old guy comes up to me, older guy, and he speaks no English, and he's trying to communicate with me, and I'm talking with him a little bit in some broken Japanese, and he grabs my arm and he just starts dragging me over to this pond, and I have no idea what he's doing, and he's pointing at something, and he's trying to get my attention, and I finally, after about 5 minutes of looking and trying to figure out what he's talking about, I find this bowl of grass built into the reeds with a mother grebe and her 2 babies sitting in there. And I was totally floored. And we looked at these birds for a minute. They're beautiful, amazing, cute little babies, amazing behavior. And to find a grebe nest like this in the wild is pretty shocking. But even that aside, I talked with that guy for at least 20 minutes about his kids and growing up in Tokyo, and where was I from, and it's really had this international exchange, which really was triggered by both of our loves for birds. And in the end, he invited me to go get ramen with him at lunch. I was on a tight schedule; I couldn't, unfortunately. But these people are willing to stick their necks out to share something that they're interested in with others, whether you have an interest in that or not. And coming from a birder's perspective, it's a really amazing and thing to see someone's passion shared in that way. We're about at the halfway mark for our show. I figured we can take a little break, play for you some public service announcements, as all DJs do. Again, this is WBOR 91.1 FM. Thank you for listening. This is our show, Bear Tracks. I'm Roger.
My name is John.
And we'll be talking every Thursday morning, 9 to 10 a.m., about different ecological topics, ecological principles. Again, today our show is about birds, birding in Maine specifically.
We'll get into more of the Maine opportunities and what you can do right now after the break.
Yeah, we'll take it away with that. So stay tuned for the next half hour of our show, and thank you for listening.
With recent reports showing that the world is not on track to meet climate targets, it's time to take action on climate change. The IPCC and over 3,600 economists call for a carbon fee and dividend legislation. A national carbon fee and dividend would put the U.S. on track to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050, while financially benefiting low-income and marginalized communities. Bowdoin students are taking part in a national movement calling on Congress to enact this policy and invite you to ask your representatives to support a carbon fee and dividend. This announcement is a public service of WBOR 91.1 FM.
When it comes to crosswalks, we've all been there. As drivers, we've almost hit someone. As pedestrians, we've almost been hit. When driving, go slow. Keep your eyes on the road. Scan continuously and expect the unexpected. When walking or biking, stop, look both ways, make eye contact with drivers, and don't attempt to cross until they stop for you. A message from WBOR and the Bowdoin College office.
All right, so we are back here again, WBOR 91.1 FM. Thank you for pause. Thank you for listening. Thank you for pausing. I hope you're still here with us. We'd like to get a bit more into the birds of Maine. And John, I would love to hear a bit about your favorite birds in the area, especially ones that you might be able to see commonly around right now. And if you could share any cool facts that might excite our listeners, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, so birding in a northern place like Maine or Minnesota, where I'm from, during the winter can be quite difficult. Even though, you still have plenty of birds visiting a bird feeder, the overall diversity generally decreases as birds migrate south for the winter, obviously, as we all know. Migration season is coming up here pretty soon. So we'll remind you all of that during one of our future shows. But in the early spring is really my favorite time to go birding because there's no leaves on the trees, all those pesky deciduous trees that make it so hard to see the birds when they're hiding up in the canopy. So all of these birds are migrating north, and it's really an amazing time to go birding. So it's a good time to start now to familiarize yourself with some of the common ones around. I wanted to highlight the black-capped chickadee. I was just listening to a podcast this morning about chickadees and the Parrottae family in general, which was quite fascinating. We could spend an hour or more on each of these bird species. But Black-capped chickadees, probably the most common bird in Maine. The Maine state bird, of course, as many of you know, so we've got to highlight it, of course. Probably throughout the whole year, and especially when we're talking about winter. And they're also closely related to the tufted titmouse, which is another common bird this time of year. So birds in the Parridae family are generally generalist foragers, meaning for birds, that doesn't mean as much as it means for something maybe like a squirrel, where they'll really eat anything. But birds will eat seeds, fruit, and as well as like small insects. So they'll really eat whatever. And they have those small beaks that are great for eating a wide variety of things. Some birds in this family have slightly longer beaks, which are, I believe, better for eating things like seeds and fruits, while some birds have slightly shorter beaks, and that's better for eating the insects. To my knowledge, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. And also, interestingly, about like in terms of eating seeds, in terms of your bird feeders, if you don't have a bird feeder, that's a great way to get into birding. I know my grandma Marlene she was a birder before me, and I've now, since she's passed, inherited a lot of her little bird trinkets, which is awesome. I wish I was more into birds when she was still with us. We could have talked about it more, but she was sort of one of the mini birders, I think sort of unspoken birders that really knows all sorts of birds just from sort of passively watching them in her home all the time. Black-capped chickadees can't bite straight through seeds like birds like finches can, which are, there's some common finch species around here as well. So they'll actually, they're quite, within their little brains, there's a lot of decision making that goes on when they approach something like a bird feeder about what seed to grab. They have to weigh the cost benefit analysis, and this is a classic ecological phenomenon. Even like big predators, like something like a wolf, do we work to take down the moose, who is going to take a lot of energy, but there's a huge reward in such a large animal as a moose, or do we focus our efforts on something like a small deer, or even, like a squirrel? I don't know that wolves really hunt squirrels, but, if you think about
Desperate
that.
times.
Yeah, they'll probably eat anything. A squirrel, that's pretty much a snack. A moose is a feast for everybody for probably several days, but it's a lot more energy. So chickadees and related birds, they have to like peck through seeds or slam seeds, against a hard surface. So if you watch them closely, in order to open them up and get to like the nutritious insides. So if you watch them closely and they approach their feeder, they're probably sitting there for a second. They're looking around. All right, what do I want to eat? And then they'll probably fly away with it, and they'll either go cache it. I'll get into the caching of these birds and the immense memory they have in a second. But they'll probably either cache it, or peck at it a few times or hammer it, and they probably aren't going to go for those bigger seeds because it's really not is so easy. Even though there's more food in there, it's harder for them to get into the center of it. And more on bird feeders, a closely related Eurasian species, I'm blanking on the name right now, but another chickadee or some sort of Eurasian tit species or titmouse. There's actually a study that found that they've evolved slightly longer beaks to more efficiently get into the food of bird feeders, which is pretty fascinating and shows, that's a minor, and I would say more harmless way that humans are impacting the evolution of all of the animals around us, but still substantial. Those birds are bird feeders are such a major food source for them that they are actually selectively evolving longer beaks to be able to more easily eat out of bird feeders. So onto that foraging, chickadee species that live in boreal forests, such as the black-capped chickadee and the boreal chickadee, have quite amazing memories, and they, much like a squirrel, stash food in the winter and for the winter, so dead insects and seeds all over the forest, and they can keep track of hundreds and even over 1,000 different caches of food. They've stashed food, under bark and places like that. So really, you might see a forest and you just see a bunch of trees. To a chickadee, that's like
Costco.
We memorize all these different taxonomic names for. It's like Costco. That's a better analogy. Even that's like your homework is your whole job is remembering where these thousands of different caches of hundreds of different food caches are. Your survival relies on that. Yeah, so black-capped chickadees have like up to 15 distinct calls to communicate a variety of different things. In this way, they sort of have more of a language than most other bird species when we think of like language. And there's some of the classic ones is like the whistled song that's like pee 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 pee. You've probably heard that around.
That's very good, John.
Thank you. I try my best. It's the a cappella show as well. And this can do a variety of things, such as advertise territory, saying like, this is my land, or maybe it's cementing a bond with a mate, saying, hey, sweetie. It's pretty popular in the spring during the breeding season. And they also use this call to coordinate with their pair mates. So, here I am, where are you? Do you want to go this way? Do you want to go that way? Working as a unit. And even when they're bringing food back to the nest after they have chicks, one bird may use that call to tell the other bird, it's your turn I'm coming back, it's your turn to leave and go forage while I feed our chicks. And then there's the other classic, like chickadee dee dee dee. So that's when chickadees flock together with other black-capped chickadees, as well as a variety of other species, closely related and more distantly related. You'll see a lot of that in the spring if you get out birding. Suddenly that you won't see any birds for 5 minutes, and suddenly there's like 20 birds in one spot, and there are a bunch of different species, and there's usually a couple of black-capped chickadees in there, or maybe more than a couple. And they use this chickadee dee dee call to say like, hi, how's it going? And they also use this to alert danger, like, hey, look over there. And they mob predators with this as well, like trying to scare them out of the area. They use things like gargles to tell a chickadee they're intruding on their territory, or like, this is my food. So that's sort of an aggressive call. They have chatters, high Z calls, a seat call, a sleet call, a broken D call. We don't need to spend too much time getting into all those.
I'd love to hear them all from you, though, John. If you have a second.
I wish I could. But, in general, and like tuning into the show in the future, we'll have some episodes. This is more of a general one. We'll have some episodes that dive more deeply into specific organisms we're particularly excited about, or ecological phenomenon, such as things like spider sociality or coral reefs, or predator-prey dynamics, or whatever it might, like keystone species like bison and beavers, whatever it might be, how plants communicate. We hope to, cover a variety of things during our last few weeks here, and maybe even continue it beyond Bowdoin. We'll see how it goes. But one other fascinating thing I learned about chickadees is that, so pishing is something, if you're a birder, you might be familiar with. I apologize, maybe I'll move a little bit from the mic in case this is sort of a hard, like a loud sound, but it's sort of like a psh, 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 going like shh, and like bringing your lips together to psh, psh, psh. It's sort of a key tool in the birder's toolbox that we try to use sparingly to not disrupt the birds too much. But this is a call that is actually mimicking the pish of chickadees and other bird species in this family, which works all over the world, because birds in this family are found pretty much all over the world, except for like Australia and obviously Antarctica, and I think not a ton in South America maybe. But this pishing is a threat call for these chickadees that tells there is a threat. And the length of this call and some other calls like tell you about the strength of the threat. So if there's a long tail to some of these chickadee calls, maybe there's a bear on the other side of the hill you're going up. So maybe turn around, or just be aware that there's probably a big predator, big nasty predator in the area. But this pishing call calls chickadees, related birds, and a variety of other birds, since they have similar predators, are respond to the same call because they've heard it over time and they've evolved these reactions to it. So the reason it works for a birder is you pish, and then birds are alerted, and they all come to check out what the threat is. So they travel towards you, or they hop out of the bushes in the ground. And this is effective because for the birds, they've now sort of created a swarm, and they can sort of decide, all right, do we want to all sort of attack onto this threat, this predator, and scare them off for our own communal safety. So that is pretty effective. But yeah, we'll go into more further deep dives of some organisms in the future. But I don't know if Roger, you want to take away some of the other common birds that are around right now?
Sure. I mean, again, these birds are probably ones that, if you're living in Maine, and even if you're living in other parts of the U.S., these are pretty prolific. You've probably seen them all just around your house. I mean, black-capped chickadees up here. We have black-capped chickadees around New Mexico, also mountain chickadees, lots of other species. So hopefully, John's great wealth of knowledge can give you a bit more of an appreciation for these birds, especially while you're just kind of viewing them as something small or maybe even insignificant out in your walks. There's plenty of other species around you can see in Maine at this point. White-breasted nuthatch is another small little bird that fits this niche of climbing downwards on trees instead of upwards, hoping to find nuts and acorns that have fallen down rather than insects that are up in the tree. So if you see a bird climbing down a tree, it's probably either a white or red-breasted nuthatch in that regard. There's also a lot of woodpeckers around right now. Downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, very distinctive birds, very distinct amongst other species. As some of these bird guys might say, they're unmistakable within their range. Hairy woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers are very similar. Again, very common. You've probably seen them around. But I don't know if you know this, John, but do you know the fact about the woodpecker's tongue?
I do, but why don't you tell everybody?
Oh, well, this takes all the fun out of it now. But woodpeckers' tongues wrap around their brain. So while they're hitting their head against a tree trunk, they can prevent themselves from getting concussions by protecting themselves in that way. So
like
looking at a woodpecker,
a helmet in football,
yeah,
evolved to do that. So maybe if we played enough football for thousands or millions of years, we would just evolve. If football players, if we could have a specific breed of humans that had stronger skulls so they could play without pads.
I mean, some might argue the tongue is around that brain is even better than helmets in football.
You
especially
could argue
if you're,
that. You could argue that.
If you're the
definitely.
Miami Dolphins quarterback,
right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right.
But again, looking at woodpeckers, hopefully you can think about that next time and then realize how amazing they are after millions of years of evolution. Other species include house finches, which are these very common brown birds with beautiful red heads. Again, probably easily overlooked. Eastern bluebirds, these blue, of course, they're blue birds with bright orange breasts. Again, I recommend you all look up pictures, look up lists of common birds in Maine. These things are, my descriptions do not do them justice over the air. But in Maine, the best thing to do birding in the winter is absolutely getting to the coast. There are so many amazing sea ducks that spend their winters right off the coast on the shore. I'm talking about harlequin ducks. Again, recommend looking these up. Eiders, of a variety of different species. Long-tailed ducks. These birds, the males especially, have these beautiful purple, red, blues all over their faces. They're birds that you also can't see if you stay inland. And in that regard, are also pretty easily overlooked, especially because most people aren't getting on boats at all in the winter, if they do anyway in the summer. So getting to the coast is big for that. There's also, I know this because of eBird, which John and I can talk about. I know John's been using this for recently and has gotten very comfortable with it as well. But there is a eastern screech owl, a red morph down in Portland right now, at a small park, and you can look up the specifics of this online. John and I went to go see them. We got down there a little after sunset and didn't have too much luck, but you haven't been back down there since at all, have you?
No, spent about an hour looking for the tree just for the owl to not come out until a reasonable time when we had to leave, unfortunately.
Which is, of course, the classic. When you go to look for something, it doesn't come out. But we were told by one of the women there that it comes out every day, so maybe it was us.
Yeah, probably.
But again, just get outside, explore. You might be able to find an eastern screech owl for yourself that no one else had discovered yet.
Yeah.
But this eBird database there's a lot to unpack here. But essentially, it is a database and an app that you can use for free. All birders can download it, and they can log their sightings of different birds, how many birds they saw of each species and what species they saw while walking around in a place. They can put the location information in, who they were with, how long they walked, how long they were out there, at what time, and then submit that list to the database. And it'll populate online so that anyone can access those databases and see what birds were seen in what place, at what time. If there's a bird that, say, you want to see a horned lark or something, which actually doesn't live up here in Maine, but first bird that comes to mind, if you look it up and you say, oh, okay, Sally saw the horned lark at this park 2 days ago, then maybe it's still there, maybe I can go find it. And it's a great way of, this community, everyone's helping each other to not only build a generally large wealth of knowledge about eBird and about birds through this database, but also helping one another to learn about birds in their own way, find them for themselves, see them firsthand, because seeing birds for yourself, it is incomparable, especially when you've only been looking at them on photos online. John, do you want to? What have your experiences been using eBird? It's a relatively easy app, especially as someone who's a little newer to it. You've been using it for quite a while, but
yeah. I think like the eBird app itself can be kind of confusing and daunting. That's like how you log the birds, and that's how you log what you see, and it contributes to this larger database, which is being used by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to create some really amazing tools, such as this is like the idea of citizen science and mass sort of data collection. They've started mapping like the migration trends of entire species over the world or over the entire continent. So you can like go on their website and see the migration patterns of all of the, say, give me a good migrating species, like a common...
oh my gosh. Tennessee warbler.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, you can see how, like from, I don't know if exactly if the Tennessee warbler spans this whole range, but you can see from California to Maine, between Mexico and Canada, you can see, like, bringing the data together like that, like, sort of like the map fills up purple with density, like how all the species migrates and when that happens based on the data these citizens have collected. And it's also contributing to meaningful research. I can't find the exact number right now, but there have been dozens, and I think it's exponentially increasing as the data set grows, as the user base grows, and the amount of bird observations they have grows for actual like scientific research articles, which is furthering efforts for conservation and things like that. And but the Merlin Bird ID app, also run by Cornell, is, I think, if you just kind of want to like begin your journey for birding, that's the one to really get. That's the one where you can, my mom uses this too, and this is what really hooked me on it, because birds are like a wonderful world, but it can be overwhelming. And, you can get a book, and that's a great way to do it. But, like, the great thing about Merlin is you can just say, you can go to the Explore tab, and you can, sort by a variety of things, but you can see all the birds and how common they are in your area, and click on them and see a variety of pictures, listen to their calls, and read about them. And then you can go to, like, the sound recording page, and you can just turn that on like I talked about earlier, and it picks up all the bird noises and identifies them for you, so you can become familiar with the birds that are just in your backyard, or if you're going around to walk with your dog and you hear some sound, you're like, what's that? And you just turn it on, and you can figure out what it is, and then you're like, oh, it's red, and then you can much more easily find it when you're looking for red instead of looking for anything in like a sea of trees, right? And you can even use they have a step-by-step ID tool. So if you saw it earlier, and maybe you didn't have your phone on you, or you're just wondering what the bird you saw earlier in the day was, you can go on there and you can say, it was between a robin and a crow sized, and it was like kind of brown and kind of green, and it was wading in the water, or it was flying or sitting on a bush, and it'll generate a list of options, and you're like, oh, you know what, it was actually a green heron, things like that. So it's just a great tool to introduce yourself to birds, the world of birding, and all that jazz. And so it just makes it accessible for anyone, whether it's your grandma, or if you are the grandma, or if you're just trying to teach your grandkids a little bit about some of the birds you see. I think it's a great tool to do that as well. And it's kind of more interactive, and so that makes it more exciting.
Yeah, and these apps, and I'm sure John's even seen this for the last few years, have evolved so much, little by little. eBird started as this very rudimentary database. You could see some basic information on what people were seeing and where. But over time, it's added all these features of target species list, where you can look at you can put in an area and a month and say, what birds have I not seen in this area yet, and what might be there, and you'll get there's a chance of 22.7% chance of seeing a red-breasted nuthatch in Maine in March, and so you kind of know the odds of seeing a bird that you've never really seen before. And you can look at hotspots, and this database is all curated by great birders in every region. Back in New Mexico, I would put up a post and I would get an email back saying, "Oh, this isn't exactly what you think it is," and all in a very respectful way. But especially as a kid growing up with that kind of insight and that kind of support from people who are extremely knowledgeable really helped me to develop as a birder. And I'm still learning so much. I mean, especially up here, it's hard to get out when you have a full load of classes and the snow has piled your car into the Harpswell parking lot. But it's something that you can take with you your whole life, fueled by other people. And as technology is developing, there are more and more ways to learn about birds in easily accessible, easy ways. There's lots of other ways to get involved as well, and I think John and I can highlight a few. Being from Minnesota, New Mexico, we love migration, especially up here. There's migration is such an amazing time of the year. I don't know, John, have you seen the Big Year movie with Jack Black,
Yes,
Steve Martin?
I have, yes.
Yeah, it's a classic. It's they make it a comedy, but it's a lot of it is pretty accurate, I would say. And when migration comes and birds fly down from Canada to Mexico, you see hundreds of species that otherwise you might not see. And a Steller sea eagle moving down through Maine. I'm sure even if you aren't a birder, you probably heard about this a few years ago. I don't, John, I'm sure you remember this.
Yes.
Did you go out to see it at all?
Yeah, I was hoping to talk about this during the podcast. I think also the Steller sea eagle represents the craze that birds can cause. The Steller sea eagle, for some context, it's a huge bird. It's an eagle, obviously, I think it's even larger than a bald eagle.
I think so, yeah.
And it's native to Siberia, so all the way around the world. And somehow this one individual has made its way to Maine, and I guess it's maybe migrating north and south. I didn't notice that, but for a couple years in a row at least, somebody spotted it, some clearly very knowledgeable birder, and was like, "Oh my gosh, that's a seagull." Maybe I think it's kind of got a large orange beak or something, and maybe they spotted that, and it doesn't look like anything around here. To an untrained eye, even for me probably, I would just be like, "Huh, what could that have been?" But somebody clearly got a good enough look, put it out there. And then suddenly, I went on the second year that it had been showing up, because the first year was our first year in college, and I wasn't a birder yet. I think that's maybe when you and Oscar saw it. But, we had to park a quarter of a mile down the road, and there were just dozens and dozens of cars. And all along this bridge, maybe 50 or 100 people are lined up with their scopes and their cameras. And I know this upset some of the locals. I think somebody actually once threw dead birds at the birders on the bridge, which is kind of an interesting choice. Waiting to for weeks on end, all these people on this bridge waiting to just get a glimpse of this bird that's flown around the world for just a second. That's the passion it involves people, and that's not really what birding is all about, but it also at the same time kind of is. Birding is really about appreciating the birds you see all around you every day. But discovering those new birds and the chance to see something halfway across the world that isn't supposed to be there, you never would know about that without this community. And, it's just remarkable that A, things like that can happen, and then B, the reaction from the community is pretty. But I didn't get to see it. Unfortunately, we waited there for maybe a half hour. It didn't come out. But I don't know if it's come back the last couple of years. But
I don't know if it's been seen lately.
Chance, right?
When I saw it, it was a tiny yellow speck of a bill, almost 2 miles away off a bridge. So I mean, I guess one can say I saw it, but it's hard to say, hard to feel like I did.
Yeah, hard to count that one. Hopefully, see another one at some point, right?
We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I think it'd be good if we gave some closing thoughts and kind of share what we might be thinking for next week and the rest of the program. Yeah. Overall, birding has connected John and I with so many people and the environment. If you have any interest, you don't need to buy into this completely. You don't need to be gung-ho about it. You don't even need to look stuff up online. Just take a pair of binoculars or go for a walk outside, see what you see. You might have that spark bird that triggers you into a lifelong hobby. If you are hoping to get a little more involved, I'd recommend getting out to the coast, seeing what amazing ducks you can see out there this time of year. And as the weather warms up, get ready for some great migrant species coming in. In May every year, eBird and Cornell mostly put this on to gain interest and try to bolster their research. But there's a big day where people will get out, usually about May 9th, May 12th, depending on the year, and we'll try to see as many birds as they can in one day. And so for John Oscar and for me, that means getting up at around 3 a.m. here and kind of driving around till 11, trying to get species all across the coast. So if you were hoping to get more involved, that's a great way to see a ton of species all at once and really bolster your interest. So I recommend planning for that as well. John, do you like to add anything in regards to what our show hopes to accomplish overall and what we might want to see moving forward?
Yeah, we really hope you guys tune in again. Reminder: this is WBOR at 91.1 FM. In the coming weeks on Thursdays from 9 to 10. Every week will be a new topic. Obviously, I kind of touched on this earlier, but we might be teaching you something. We might be going in depth for an hour about bison and all their impacts on the environment, or we might be spending an hour on coral reefs and the vast amazingness that lives within coral reefs or the deep sea, or maybe we'll talk about a recent conservation issue. There's obviously a whole lot going on with the government and everything that's happening right now, and so this is an ever evolving world, and with climate change and everything, there's just so much. I mean, you would have to talk constantly for 10 people's lifetimes times to the 10th power to cover probably just the surface of everything there is to know and we don't know about the natural world. So we'll just try to scratch the surface of some of the stuff we're particularly knowledgeable about. I think it's a good excuse for us to keep on learning, and even better excuse for us to hopefully teach and inspire some of you all out there. I come back every week. I think next week, fortunately and unfortunately, I won't be able to be on the show because I'll be on a trip with one of my classes to go out into Maine and hopefully see some bears and bear cubs that will be sedated awesome for some data collection. But I hopefully the next time I talk to you guys in a couple weeks here, I'll have held a yearling bear cub in my hands, which I think Roger has done before, which would be a life-changing experience. But that means next Thursday will be a Roger solo show. I don't know if he's planning to do a radio or just some music, but maybe he can tell you what he's thinking.
It's either going to be that or some music. We'll see as we get closer. I also host a show every Tuesday mornings from 10 to 11 called Title Tracks, where it's mostly a music program. I choose a theme, either artists or a different genre of music, and I'll just play that for the hour, get some history, and ranges from Elvis to Jane Buffett to classic rock, folk. So tune in for that as well, and that may be what next Thursday is. We'll decide as we get a little bit closer. Overall, and just want to also express that the viewpoints expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect those of WBOR Bowdoin College. So if any of you would like to reach out to the station with any comments, questions, please contact wbor.org/contact. I appreciate you for doing that. Appreciate you for listening, whether you are here in the Mid-Coast Maine area, tuning in on the radio, or listening at wbor.org, as my dad seems to be. He's texting me right now. We appreciate it. We hope that you will look at birds in a different way, even if we've only influenced you in a very small way. But we appreciate you for taking the time to listen to our passions, to our interests, and we hope to see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah, thanks so much. Stay tuned next hour for Imposter Syndrome, a music show hosted by Evan Luca. That should be coming up here soon. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursdays, and we'll see you next week.
Stay cool.
Stay